Yeah. Okay. Okay. Back to it.
Get on the
And
ball,
she,
girl.
well, I mean, I did. I have papers. I have papers and papers and papers and papers.
Hi, welcome back to Beyond the Facade. This is Doña Junta from Swami Chronicles.
I am Sabrina.
Welcome back. This is, I believe, our 14th episode.
Wow. 14 episodes. How do you feel about that?
We're slow and steady, I guess. It feels good though. I mean, it's definitely not very easy to do a podcast overall. I mean, it takes a lot of work. So I really commend people that really like have so much out there because
And
it's a lot of work.
dedicate so much time to it, right?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for joining us on today's episode. And again, if you're going to be visual, we will be having the YouTube as well, showing the recording, and then everybody else is on audio. But we're still working on both, trying to get, more acclimated with the technology. But today we're going to talk about something really very interesting, and we wanted to do this episode originally kind of around the Day of the Dead, but it takes so much time to like get all the research done and all this, right? But it's still not too far from Day of the Dead.
No, and it's still the month. A lot of cultures still take this whole month as the season changes to remember their loved ones.
Yes. So we're going to talk about two historical cemeteries today, and some of the history behind these cemeteries. And we're thinking of, expanding this for future episodes with other cemeteries that, of interest in this area and beyond the area, right?
Yes, we're definitely, well, I've always been a taphophile, but it seems like somebody else is too.
So,
So,
so give the definition of that because not everybody knows what that is.
a lover of cemeteries, of gravestones, like a gravestone groupie, someone who likes to be in the cemetery, enjoys the cemetery for like non-traditional purposes, maybe. I don't think the definition even goes that far in. It's just basically a lover of the cemeteries.
Right. Okay. So today we're going to talk about Evergreen Cemetery in Boyle Heights. And I like to just say Rosedale Cemetery, kind of like Pico Union area, more closer to downtown. It used to, now it's called Angeles Rosedale Cemetery, but originally it was just Rosedale Cemetery. So those two, and then we're going to have kind of a discussion on symbolic, you know, the symbolism behind some of the monuments and designs of some of these cemeteries that are in these in particular and just in general, and just also discuss some of the infamous and not and famous people that are actually buried there today. Or there's going to be different terms for that because some people are cremated, some people are entombed. There's different, variations of everything, but they're resting there. We talk about various people that are resting there. What else would you say that we're gonna? Did I get everything covered for the episode?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you said, if I remember listening to you right now correctly, that these Evergreen was the very first cemetery in Los Angeles. These are the beginning of cemeteries in Los Angeles, so therefore they are Victorian cemeteries.
Yes, which
Um,
is really cool.
yes, yes, they're both lovely. I think that you've given a very full intro.
Yes. So, and then at the end, we could just do the comment, or, as far as what you've been interested in cemeteries for a long time. I mean, traditionally for me, a cemetery was to go for a funeral. And for the most part, like you go there for a funeral or visit somebody. That's what I would go to. If people that I know that have passed away, we would visit weekly or depending on holidays or, birthdays and things like that. But it was never like as, oh my gosh, significant, because they were usually like very manicured cemeteries that are more modern. They didn't have the aesthetic of these Victorian cemeteries that have always been in LA, but now kind of are a little bit more neglected, which is a good and bad thing, I guess, which we'll talk about.
Yes.
And we did, I mean, we didn't get it. We did explore some cemeteries in New Orleans when we were there, which is a whole nother probably episode on just their cemeteries alone.
Yes, they're a whole different type of cemetery, if you will.
Right.
I've personally been up and down anywhere I go. I check out a cemetery. I make a point to check out a cemetery, so I can name you cemeteries in each state that I've ever been to that are wonderful cemeteries. I think it's a great tribute to the dead, a great place to remember them. It's also very quiet and peaceful in most cemeteries. And Evergreen and Rosedale um, are directly related to our history, which makes them also much more special to us.
Yeah. So kind of making it come back to life in a way in this
E-
episode. So
exactly, making the past make sense in the present.
yes. So we're gonna start off talking about Evergreen Cemetery, and just a little background on Evergreen in my own personal kind of experience with it. Maybe like 7 years ago, I wanted to do a tour of it. Like there was a tour they were offering. I think they would offer a tour around Halloween. And it was like a once a year type of thing. And I ended up missing it, so I didn't go. And then there was another person, I think Barrio Boychik was giving tours of the Evergreen as well. But then with the pandemic, everything kind of stopped. And as far as like passing by it, I have always passed by it, but never like kind of went into like look fully until more recently when we started exploring.
Agreed, agreed. And for me, I don't recall driving too much around Evergreen. I remember always passing Rosedale and always looking at it and on the outside and being like, oh my gosh, look at those headstones. I just want to go in. But it was always like for business issues or picking things up, and I never made time to go because it's in downtown LA and we don't live in downtown LA.
Right, exactly. So we first went back. I think we tried to go back many times, but it was always closed
Yes, story
because
of
we're
our
always starting
life.
very late.
Yes, everything closed. All cemeteries. We're lucky that out here they close around 4 or 5, and some places they close around 2. And
Yeah.
we're lucky they're a little open a little later, but we're
But they
like
did
great.
cut back in the pandemic. They had completely closed either fully or they closed really early during the pandemic.
Yeah, and that makes sense for the situation.
Yeah. So we finally got to go when we were looking for the mausoleum in American Me. That was one of the times we went. I mean, we drove in, but like kind of to go look for something specifically.
Yeah,
We went that time when we went to go look for the mausoleum and that was shown in American Me, the scene of that. And then we kept saying we're gonna go back. So from there on, we kind of been like going back a little by little. So I'm gonna
yeah.
go ahead.
Cemetery hoppers.
So I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the actual history of the cemetery. So Evergreen Cemetery was established August 23rd, 1877, and it's one of the oldest cemeteries that obviously still around. It's said to hold around 300,000 interments. That sounds like such a lot of people.
A lot of people.
Yeah. And just to give a idea, it is one of the oldest, but prior to that, there was the city cemetery, which was at Fort Moore, which is like right above Alvera Street. That place is fully developed differently. They tore it down, that whole Fort Moore, but there was a city cemetery there, and Bunker Hill was not far from there, and that was kind of where the rich people had their mansions, Victorian mansions and whatnot. And that cemetery got full, so they needed to find a new place. So they ended up founding Evergreen, which was more of a private cemetery, one of the first. So it's located on First Street and Lorena, so in Boyle Heights. It used to be called Brooklyn Avenue before it was called, just First Street, but it was Brooklyn. And so the cemetery is opened in 1877, and it's interesting because they did allow people of all colors, like white, black, Hispanic. However, there was segregation in the cemetery. So in that sense, there was still a lot of racism tones because of you couldn't be buried around certain people. So what happened is that they created on the corner of the cemetery a section called Potter's Field. And that section was specifically for poor people, indigenous people, black people, and Chinese people. Anybody that wasn't white would go into that section. It was kind of terrible because we talked about the Chinese massacre not long ago, and the Chinese were treated really badly during this time. And there was just so many rules and regulations for even a burial for Chinese people. They had to pay $10 to be buried at Potter's Field, which was a couple hundred or more today. And a white indigent person didn't have to pay anything. So they were still really harsh on the Chinese community at the time.
It's sad. I mean, it's unfortunately our history in the U.S. and the colonization of this country. Everyone came west, manifest destiny, the new frontier. And when the gold rush happened, so many people fled. Different migrants from all over the world came, and we had a huge population of Chinese immigrants come in looking for wealth and fortune themselves. In fact, when I recently went to Virginia City, Nevada, earlier this year, we came across, Melissa and I came across this little town called, what is it called? Chinese town? Chinese something. I have to look it up again. But the town was specifically named Chinese town, let's just say. And I feel really bad because I don't know it off the top of my head right this second. That town was founded and named that because of the population that lived there. And they were there because of the gold rush, and then eventually, became appropriated and became larger of a community. So we have a history, an ugly history in the U.S. Of colonization and then bastardizing the actual indigenous people that lived on these lands. And California is no exception, even if though we were a union state, meaning we didn't allow slavery here. We still treated a lot of people that lived here, Californios, so people of Mexican and Spanish ancestry, Black people and Chinese people, and anywhere in between, a lot different than you would have been treated if you were like an English Protestant.
Yes. So it's interesting because that corner now, Potter's Field, is part of the LA County crematorium. So that it's like, you can't even tell it's like separated from Evergreen. And every year they have a mass ceremony for indigenous people that were never claimed. So unclaimed bodies and Jane Doe, John Doe. And they do it every year, but they hold the bodies for 3 years until somebody claims them. And then if nobody claims them, they do a mass grave. According to what I read, I believe everybody's ashes are in individual box, and then they're all put together in a mass grave. I did have the opportunity to be present at that ceremony last year during the pandemic via Zoom. They had an actual live stream of the ceremony which was really, really
Wow.
nice to be able to see it. And they actually, had perform, music. They had people speaking. It was really nice to like hear them actually pay respects to people that have nobody, no families, and we don't know who they are. So they do that every year. So I recommend, if you ever have if you run into that event to join it. And they usually every other year you could actually go there and be at the ceremony in person.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's a really nice thing the county does for the, people that are lost and never forgotten, I guess, in a sense.
It's important that somebody gives them a farewell.
Yes. And I believe they also said that there's, which we didn't get to see because it was closed, but there's like a kind of a monument wall in the
Uh-huh.
crematory in the back dedicated to the Chinese that were originally at Potter's Field before it was actually a crematory. So there's like a memorial wall there too, which, we'll hopefully we get to go back and see that one day. Are
Yeah,
you?
that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So with Evergreen, it's been around so long, so there was so much history on it. We're not going to be able to cover every single thing on this
No.
one episode. I wish we could, but there's just so much history. So I kind of picked out a few things that I thought were really interesting of the cemetery, and then we could talk about kind of the aesthetic of it. But one of the things that I thought was super interesting was on May 14th, 1926, the superintendent Zurenberg was caught, in his cottage because back then, like a director of a cemetery was called a superintendent. Now they're called directors. And they used to actually live on the grounds in a cottage, which is kind of interesting, I guess.
Well, I when you think of someone living on the grounds of a cemetery, I think of like England or London specifically, like maybe in the 17th century or the 18th century, because there was a lot of grave robbing, and
Yeah.
people were paid money to go dig up graves and sell them for like usually medical experimentation and whatnot. And so it makes sense to think of like someone sleeping on the cemetery grounds for that reason. But when we think to California and we think that it wasn't well established, that well established, it was so, but not in comparison to a big cosmopolitan city that it is now. It seems a little odd for someone to sleep there, a little morbid or macabre. Kind of like
Yes,
it.
exactly. So what alerted the sheriffs or the police at the time was during the neighbor around the cemetery started hearing a lot of noises coming from the cemetery. They describe it as shrieks, laughter, or scurrying, unearthly shrieks. So they started getting concerned. There were some people that were superstitious that were like, oh, the spirits are unrested. And some people were like more scared, like, what's going on? Why is there odd noises coming from the cemetery? So after so many complaints, the police or sheriffs decided to investigate. So they went there at night, and as they were walking towards the cottage, as they were walking around the grounds and they went towards the superintendent's cottage, they opened the door, and to their surprise, they found two bars, four bars that looked exactly like, and this is what the article is saying, that they look pre-Volstead Act, which is the act that they passed during Prohibition. So they look like bars that pre-Prohibition, and they even seen they seen glasses, lemons, and hard-boiled eggs in containers.
Yum, pickled eggs. That's a must when you're drinking and doing the Charleston.
Yes, and just a little FYI, which I want to do an episode on this later, but the prohibition was from 1920 to 1933, so it was a very long time.
Yeah, it's 13 years.
A long time. Imagine
Yeah,
that, like how all the shading is going on to
of
get a
course.
drink.
Can you imagine if someone told you today, like, no more drinks? It
We just
goes
had a
against,
bar episode, right? Like,
right? Can you imagine?
Yeah, it would be crazy. But so they said that in one bar there was a container barrel full of whiskey, and on the other bar there was a barrel full of wine. And quote, this is a quote of the captain. He's like, it was the neatest little bar room he's had ever seen, you know. The neatest little bar room we've seen in many a month. That's what the captain said.
Wow.
And then as they were leaving, they noticed like an old hearse.
Uh-huh.
Like a kind of beat up hearse. So they thought it looked really weird. So they went towards it and they found more wine in like hidden in the hearse.
Wow. That's what you need a hearse for, is to hide your wine.
Yes.
And no one can tell me any different at this point anymore.
So the quote that we had heard during the research was actually a quote from the captain. He said, "There's no more spirits at Evergreens, although there might be a few ghosts for all I know."
But I'm bumped.
Yeah. And he's like, they said that the cemetery had quite a large patronage of people going there.
I can only imagine. Some of your friends from where did we just recently visit? El Royale, your flappers doing the Charleston true. All the way to the cemetery. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really cool, interesting story. I can't even, that would be fun to see now, right?
It would be. In fact, I think we should reenact that.
They should reenact that. Like,
that would be so much fun. Historical Society, can we reenact this, please?
They should reenact it now. So I thought that was a really cool story. And so as also, let's just kind of describe kind of the aesthetic of it, because for people that are listening, you want to kind of picture this of how this place look. And we're going to put photos in the video, but for people listening, let's kind of describe how Evergreen looks. And just FYI, like Evergreen was originally called that because it was green.
Yes.
Evergreen, right? But
there's still
now.
It's still green. It has green spots. It's got a lot of green. I think it's fairly well manicured given, you know, some of the disarray that we see in other cemeteries. It's kind of spread out, so it's not like on top of each other. There's a lot of old headstones. There's a lot of new headstones. There's a lot of like specific areas for specific nationalities, and they seem much more modern. So maybe they choose at this point to be buried that way. Maybe it started and it's just kept on like as a tradition at this point. You've got a lot of old mixed in with the new, a lot of wonderful angels and big monuments to famous, important people.
For me, there's a few pictures, and Angela's kind of has this two of these kind of like dryish palms that are very high. There's a lot of famous pictures of those palms.
Yeah.
Palm trees. And you know, the fencing is not very elaborate, like around it. They did put a track around it for people could work out around it. That was like put in, you know, in the 2000s.
Yeah, I did see that. I noticed that. It's
and
almost like an encouragement.
Excuse me?
It's like an encouragement to like invest and like walk around there and be healthy. It's nice. Try to get the community involved.
Yeah. And there is a nice Gothic church, they say, in Little Chapel. It's very small in the cemetery, which we did get a close-up look at it. It's made out of kind of like cobblestone in a sense almost, right?
It looks, yeah, much like that. Just like that with like ivy kind of like overgrown. It's small, so you can tell it's old Victorian because they were much smaller back then. Mm-hmm. Little windows stepping up to the chapel. And we weren't obviously able to go into it, but we could see through the windows. And man, it's a small church, but the high beams make it look like it's so big inside with the buttery stained glass windows.
Yeah, there was some kind of, I guess, almost like arches in a sense, or some similar to arches.
Yeah.
The wood beams and the lighting was nice. I don't know if it has stained glass or it was just like the way the lighting was.
I'm not sure. I think, well, if it's not stained glass, then it's some sort of film over the window to make it appear the lights appear like a buttery yellow color.
Yeah, very warm tones.
Very.
So that church is there, and that church has been in many movies. I think they said Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a scene with that church, so we got to go back and look at that scene.
Yes, we
And
must
a
find
lot
it.
of films have been, used at the cemetery. So that probably a whole nother episode on itself for you film lovers, because there's probably a lot of movies that were filmed there. So, and also again, the roads are very, kind of that dark street pavement, which I don't care for, but it's kind of it is what it is. And the backside is kind of more barren, like the back part.
Yes.
A little bit kind of
with like a chain link fence.
Yeah. So there's been complaints, through the years that it's been let go, and the main building is not as elaborate as compared to Calvary, and we already know why Calvary would be more elaborate and more manicured and nice.
Money.
Money. Yeah, so they have more money, and also I like the beautiful entranceway with the arch, and like remember the stone
where it looks
or whatever it was.
Yes, where it's
really pretty.
It's gorgeous.
So we'll be posting pictures of that. But so that entrance is really nice, and the entrance like that means something in like cemetery lingo. It means like the entrance to heaven or something like that. Yes, arches when cemeteries do have that. So it's a very historic cemetery, well worth visiting, and there's a lot of some of the ones that just we didn't get to look into everyone, but just some of the names we see familiar is Hollenbeck, the Bigsby's are there, Lancashire, Van Nuys. Those are big names that we see for cities and streets all the time, and they are buried there, and they have their monuments and all that.
You ever wonder where streets get their names from, such as or cities and Van Nuys, Lancashire, all names like that? Take a minute to research the people, and there you go visit them at their resting spot.
Right. And then there's a lot of other interesting people from just all over LA, but one group of people I thought was interesting was the Pacific Coast Showmen's Association, which is kind of in the back, and they have a big monument with a tiger on it, and that area is dedicated for performers, circus, sideshow workers, carnival arts, and things like that. So those people that traveled, all over the country, they somehow were able to get a spot right there at Evergreen. So everybody that belonged to the association was buried there together, which I thought that was really nice and interesting.
I do too. I think it's fun, and because they're a whole community within themselves that they have made community, in their final resting places. Right. They weren't always accepted in all society. I'm generalizing here. I'm not talking about any one specific, but carnies and so forth. And now they have a place that's like their own community still.
Yeah. And it's not clear if that association doesn't exist anymore, or if they still have some connection, which, it'll be interesting to know that, like, if they're still around to this day, because there's still people that work in that area.
Yeah.
So Sabrina's going to talk about a very important person that was buried there, which we kind of didn't know until we started digging more into the research, and her name is Biddy Mason. So talk to us about her.
Well, I'm pretty sure most of us have known about Bridget Biddy Mason. We've probably heard about her growing up in school, but we don't really equate, Biddy Mason to California unless we remember all the stories. But in fact, Biddy Mason played a big important role in California, and we were so glad we got to see her headstone. So Biddy Mason was born a slave. She was born in 1818 in Mississippi. She naturally had lots of skills, as a lot of, unfortunately, slave people would have to have. They learned lots of trades from their family around them, and she was known very well to be a good midwife and to have a lot of skill with herbal skills. So eventually, her masters or her slave owners migrated or traveled to from Mississippi to Salt Lake, what is now Salt Lake City, Utah. Back then, it was still part of Mexico. They lived there for a time, and at some point, they decided to they converted to became they became Mormons, and that's what brought them to Salt Lake City. So eventually, they came from Salt Lake City back down to California. California was a union state that did not allow slavery. So at some point, Biddy Mason was able to petition the courts for her freedom, and she was granted freedom for her and some of and her family. She was also known to be a nurse, and she accumulated a lot of wealth for someone of her in that day of being a freed black slave and being in California. She invested in the community. She uh, went to see prisoners. She I'm going to read, guys. That's why I'm stuttering right now. So if you don't see my face, it's because I'm reading. So she sheltered the poor. She visited prisoners. She made a daycare. And I didn't know this until I was doing some research earlier. She made a daycare for Black children. And we're talking about, this is the 1800s, the late 1800s. That's amazing that she had that kind of a vision at that point. And she also helped to bring about the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles, the AME Church. It's the very first Black church in California. So we decided, after seeing her and felt this need to know more, we decided to go visit the church ourselves. So we drove down, and we were very lucky to find Wanda, who was what, a volunteer and a paid
Yeah, she's a
volunteer.
church member. So they were, working, excuse me, a church member. And I think for 15 years or more, right? 20 years.
Something like that, something like that. And she had so much knowledge and was so happy to share with us. And a lot of the things that Biddy Mason stood for during her time, the philanthropy, is still evident to this day. They own very many properties on the street and throughout around the city. Not as much as they used to, but they have a housing for AIDS, for people with AIDS. They do, I think, a food drive. Uh, they have outreach programs for victims of gun violence. They have a lot going on. They're very active in the community, and you can tell just by talking to her that the vision that Biddy Mason had is still alive and well to this day.
Absolutely. And just as a side note, unfortunately, Biddy Mason was in an unmarked grave up until the 80s when Tom Briley, the first Black mayor, decided to give her some respect by putting an actual marker at her unmarked grave. I just couldn't believe that she had an unmarked grave for so many years. So the marker was put in by him. I'm sure it was symbolic. He felt some kind of passionate about being able to really represent her, because first of all, she should have been a long time ago, but it was just not cared for, and he was able to get her a marker, and then now she has a space there at the. She always had a space, but now it's more respected. So that was sad, hearing that part.
It was sad, but I don't think that she would have cared so much, because I think that she saw the bigger picture. We care because she was an amazing person and everything she'd been through. She made it out of slavery, made a way for herself, paved a way for herself, and so many others. We can't even imagine what kind of effect that she's had on the community in Los Angeles from the beginnings of when she came here and started all the different programs that she did. Like she played a major role in the city. I don't think she really cared, but we care, and we're so glad that we have somewhere where we can go visit her and leave flowers and pay our respects.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if she cared or not? We don't really know. But also like just to the AME church is in an area called Sugar Hill, which was the only area that they let like wealthy black, entertainers or people of that caliber were able to live because they weren't allowed to be in the Hollywood area. So that area was known for, more black wealth during that time. So they still try to preserve that in the area. So that was really amazing, and we're gonna talk more about that area in a future episode, but also in our next section when we talk about Rosedale.
Yes, and if you guys have want to volunteer, they're having a huge food drive for Thanksgiving and Christmas and a toy drive. Go and show them some love.
Yeah, definitely. So, what else? Any other comments on your behalf for Evergreen? Anything else that thoughts about it? I know that as far as you haven't been able to do any paranormal kind of vibes to it how you would normally other places, but what is your thoughts regarding that side or your own spiritual side?
I think that evergreen is lovely. I like it is green, even though it has splotches that aren't. There's not a ton of trees. There are trees, but there's not some cemeteries are like filled with trees. Some aren't. This one has trees sporadically. So it leaves a lot open. And when I think of evergreen, I think of blue skies and green grass. It's very lovely. It's very perfect to have tea, like tea and a little picnic. It just seems very comfortable, and we've never experienced any problems being there one way or another. And it's pretty clean.
Yeah, we never, they don't give you a hard time for going there or any kind of really big restrictions or anything, which it's nice to just leave you alone. I mean, obviously you're respecting it too.
Yeah.
If you're not respecting it, obviously, then that's different. But the groundskeepers or even the people in the front have been kind. They haven't never been rude or anything.
As far as the paranormal is concerned, I haven't really sat down long enough to really take it all in, but I'm sure there's stuff there. Everything seems really peaceful there. Evergreen just comes off as peaceful. I love the
Yeah.
old headstones. It's beautiful.
She can't sit there long because the sun is really hot when we have to
Yes.
take her.
Yes. Otherwise, I will melt. And we don't want that to happen, guys.
So the next cemetery we're going to talk about is one that I think is the favorite of all of them. And
It
it came
is.
way later, right? It should have
Yes.
been a long time ago.
I'm biased for this cemetery because the whole reason we initially wanted to go there is one of its very important members there, residents, I should say, one of the very important residents that are there now. But it's a gorgeous cemetery.
Yes. So Rosedale Cemetery, and I'll start with the history. Rosedale Cemetery is located at 1831 West Washington Boulevard, and it is kind of the USC, kind of close to the Pico Union area. And it opened November 20th, which was coming up, 1884. And they described it as the first monument park style cemetery. So this meant that there was going to be more from the research like artwork, architecture, more funerary type of architecture. And you could really see that when you go in. And it was the first cemetery on the West Coast to have the second crematory. And the cemetery, what was great about this, it was non-denominational, so it was not a specific religion, and they accepted everybody from rich, poor, famous, or anonymous. So they were not biased, racist, prejudice against the people. So that was an amazing part of that. And it wasn't segregated either, like Evergreen. Everybody was mixed wherever. Um, so at the time in 1831, it was considered modern.
Quite modern. It's hard to imagine that, but yeah.
Yes, and just when I was looking at the differences, we were talking about that cemeteries before were the church used to handle that stuff in a graveyard around the cemetery. So to have a private space away was a modern type of idea, and in the way they did it, which was a park style. And the reason they described that is again the artwork, and then they added a lot of trees, shrubs, the roadways, flower gardens. All of that was part of the aesthetic of the park type of cemeteries.
Well, when you break down the park cemetery, what do we do at a park?
Picnic, go with family.
Exactly.
Spend the
And
day.
that's the Victorian way of remembering the dead.
Yeah. It also had the Columbrium, which was, and we'll talk about that place in a bit, but originally the Columbrium was a receiving vault. So before it became that, it was a receiving vault, which they would put the bodies in there and then do what they have to do and then put them, the burial or whatever it was. So it wasn't always a columbarium, and now it's that. It, according to the research, it might have been redone. I couldn't get a specific date, but it could have been the late 20s or even to the 40s. It was redone. Again, there was a superintendent that used to live on the grounds, and he was pretty well known superintendent at the time. So let's first start with some of the weird stories of Rosedale, and then we'll talk about our own experiences there, and then some notable people. One weird story was June 1882, they found a woman by the name of Carrie Love. She was a woman from San Francisco, and they found her dead, kind of draped over a child's grave. When you first hear that, you think, oh, maybe, a mother lost her child and she's, grieving and she couldn't handle it anymore and ended up committing suicide on her child's grave.
Whoopee. Whoops. That's what I did earlier. In the middle of your story, you were gaining momentum.
So you would think kind of that picture, but they did some investigation, and I guess what happened was maybe a few days before, this woman in black in downtown LA had asked this man that worked at a magazine stand to help her with her luggage and whatnot, to take it to a hotel that she was staying at. And she had like specific instructions, and it was very odd. Then he ended up getting like a note the next day, like where he was working, saying that, if she could do him another favor and pay for the room that she owed, and also like, get the luggage that it was just very odd. Like she had these instructions, but there was also, they ended up finding kind of a suicide note at the time. And it doesn't say why she went to that child's grave. There's no connection to that. That child had a different family, but she ended up saying that she was hopeless and she had lost her job, I guess, in San Francisco. So she was going to probably do a deep depression and ended up coming down here. And unfortunately, she wanted to leave. So she ended up committing suicide at the cemetery. And they kind of traced back, the woman and the note, everything to the person. At the time, they would have like people come and identify the body, and they would have the body laid out, and people would come and see if they knew her. And nobody knew her until finally that magazine, the owner of that stand was like, oh yeah, I remember this woman, and that's her. So I thought that was a very odd kind of story.
Can you imagine coming to the cemetery to put flowers for your loved one and seeing a lady slumped over a headstone?
Yeah, that's kind of scary. But
Yeah.
it's unfortunate back then that, she just felt that was the way and there was no type of help back then. There was also a ton of stories of celebrations for soldiers because they do have a section of the cemetery that they call the Grand Army of the Republic, and it holds Union soldiers, Civil War, Spanish American War soldiers. So through the years, they always had a bunch of celebrations for the that section, soldiers. So there's always been a lot of celebrations at the cemetery for that. Um, One funny story was this man in 1899 got fined $25, which is a lot, for picking flowers.
Oh, why?
He said he used to work at some bar down the street from the cemetery and he would walk to work and he would pick flowers. I'm imagining maybe he didn't have a big fence back then and cross through it or go through it somehow and he would take flowers. And he's like, I didn't think it was a big deal. And the superintendent was like, it is a big deal. And he got arrested and he had to pay $25 fine.
Can you imagine getting arrested for picking flowers in the cemetery?
But there's still signs now like don't steal flowers in a sense. So I could see
Yeah,
how
yeah. But
how that
or like let's say you're poor and you don't have money for flowers for your loved one that's buried there, so you snatch them from someone else's headstone and place them in front of your loved ones.
yeah. So it was a problem since 1899. Mhm. So before we get to notable people, let's talk about how we kind of ran into it, the
Okay.
cemetery.
Well, we have to talk about notable people
Well,
then.
yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, if you guys haven't listened to our banning banning house episode, I don't remember what number that was. I would suggest you guys take a listen to that one. We talk about Phineas Banning, who is the father of the Port of Los Angeles, and he established Wilmington. And you're going to want to take a listen. With that said, Phineas Banning was initially buried in the cemetery across from his house, the Wilmington Cemetery, with his first wife and other multiple children that died at a very young age in childhood. His second wife, at some point, had him dug up and replanted, if you will, into Angeles Rosedale Cemetery. And now he rests with his second wife and his two daughters at Angeles Rosedale.
What is their
So
names?
he is next. Phineas Banning is directly next to, in between, I should say, his daughter Lucy Banning and his wife Mary Hollister Banning, and his second daughter, or his first daughter technically, Mary Banning. Uh, I forget her married last name, but
Norton or Norris or Norris or
Norris,
Norton?
Norris, Norris. Yeah, you're right. Norris is right on the other side of his obelisk. So she's buried right there. So his second wife, his two daughters, he's buried with them now instead of his first wife.
Yeah,
So
so we had gone to Wilmington to see his first wife,
Rebecca.
yes, and their children. And then we said we had to go visit him at Rosedale.
And we've been meaning to for months, but it closes too early and we never could get out of there.
Yeah,
You
it was
know,
a long time.
and it's never Los Angeles. We live in the greater Los Angeles County, but it's still pretty far. It's going to take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to get to anywhere in Los Angeles from where we're at. So it took us a hot minute to get there. But when we finally did, it was like,
It was
oh,
like
hallelujah.
30 minutes before closing, or literally, right?
Yes. Yeah, or 45 minutes, but it was like within that hour frame.
Yes.
And we called and we said, hey, we've never been here before and we're looking for our great friend, Phineas Banning. And the
Yes.
person in the office was like, who? And she was like, what is your loved one's date of birth or date of death? And I was like, 18 something. And she's like, oh. And so we said, okay, well, we'll be there soon and we're going to pick up a map. And we went in and we grabbed a map, and he was not hard to find. He was pretty easy to find. And we jumped out so excited and so happy that we finally found our father of the Port of Los Angeles.
Describe his section.
It's beautiful. If you've been inside, well, I guess it depends, you know, the eye of the beholder. I'll just talk directly right where he's located. He's not far from the entrance, not too far, I should
No,
say.
I meant like his monument. How does it?
Well, he has an obelisk. It's tall. We guessed it would be anywhere between 15 and 20 feet, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty tall. On the very top, it has like a draping of some kind of vine with a flower at the end. It's really lovely. It basically just has his name and his date of birth and his date of death. It's a really nice monument for him. He's definitely deserving of it. His wife and his daughters are flat headstones right on the sides of the obelisk.
No, well,
And
they're rounded. They're little. They stick out of the ground. Him, his daughter and wife, and then his other daughter, it's a flat one.
am I crazy? Now I'm going to look at the photo right now. I'm looking right now. I'm looking. Oh gosh. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Oh, okay, you're right. They're little tiny ones, I guess. They're close to the ground. So maybe his daughter Mary's is flat. And so that's maybe where I'm getting it from. They're really tiny though. They're not too much out of the ground and they are rounded. But yeah, so they're all right there and we were so excited. We jumped out. We grabbed our phones to take a glorious photo of Phineas Manning's resting spot. And then we were accosted. We were harassed by some man wearing a shirt that said security with a hat, a backpack, looking super duper unprofessional.
Well, he came up to us and he was pretty much saying like, we can't take photos, we can't record. Who do we have here that we could only be here if we have somebody that, you know, we know there, which we told him
we did
right here.
exactly.
And he didn't know who he was, so he was like, oh, but he kept like kind of hounding us like, you can't take pictures, you can't stay here that long. I don't know,
it was off.
It made us feel like he killed our vibe totally.
Yeah, he was acting as if we were committing some kind of criminal act or something. He told us we weren't allowed to record, we weren't allowed to take photographs. So we put our stuff away and felt like, you know, whatever. We were talking and grumbling between the two of us. And no later than we were just like done with the whole situation, trying to scrape what time we had left to like look at what else was around. He came back and harassed us some more and basically went on a rampage about went on a tangent about how there was a lady there that did something in some kind of sacrifice and the cops had to get her out. I don't know. I know what he was talking about. I wasn't trying to
like witchcraft or like, you know, he was just saying people are doing like witchcraft type of stuff.
Yeah, and rituals, and someone stole a car, which all didn't really add up. And we're just like, whatever, we're leaving. And I just felt really unsettled by the whole situation. It was really, really frustrating because I see cemeteries all the time and go into what are considered private cemeteries all the time. And as long as you're respectful, there's no problem. Even if there's going to be a rule about no photography, whatever, but we're in there not causing any kind of a harm. In fact, we're remembering somebody. We had somebody there we were there for, and his grandkids, his wife, his kids, his grandkids, they're gone. There's nothing that anyone in the family is going to be upset for us to go and remember Phineas Manning. So it was really off. And I called the office and I talked to a gal and explained to her what had happened. And she told me that some girl who looked like a witch was there. And I was like, that's me, but I'm not dressed up like a witch. I'm just dressed in my normal clothes. And that's stereotyping. And we're not there to do anything but to admire, observe, and remember. And so because of that, they said to go ahead, let them know whenever we wanted to come in, and they would let the security know that we weren't up to any problems. We weren't trying to cause any problems. And luckily enough, when we went back, just that happened. We were left alone and we were allowed to explore just how we wanted to.
Yeah, very different experience the second time.
It was very much. It was so wonderful. The cemetery is gorgeous. The aesthetic is dark and disheveled and not green, brown, burnt ground, burnt from the sun. You know, kind of scorched, hot ground, and the headstones are so old, so old, growing from trees in different ways and toppled over, and just a lovely aesthetic. I really like Rosedale. It's gorgeous.
Yes. So that was the first experience. So we were like paranoid, like the second time, like, oh wow, like they're gonna say something. So we're trying to be really careful, but they ended up not, and the guard was a different guard, so maybe he's not there no more. But he was cool. No, he didn't say nothing. And I seen other people that were there, like couples enjoying the cemetery. I seen, other people that were just relaxing. Either maybe they know somebody that's there or not, but and nobody was bothering anybody. It seemed pretty peaceful yesterday. So it made a huge difference.
It did. It really did.
So we also decided to buy a couple bouquets of flowers and show our respects to a lot of there's a lot of notable people there. A lot. We can't name all of them. I mean, they're just all watching us at that point because of
Yeah.
the hillside, right?
Yeah, there's too many. There we would be here forever just listing them.
Yeah. But one of the ones, because we were talking about Sugar Hill earlier, was Hattie McDaniel, and she's buried at Rosedale, and it was a great connection just coming from Sugar Hill, because of Biddy, and then she owns a house there, or she did at one time, and now she's at Rosedale. I mean, it's kind of an interesting story, but do you want to share about Hattie?
Everyone remembers Hattie McDaniel as I don't remember what her name was in Gone with the Wind. I should have had that in
Mammy.
front. Mammy, that's what I figured. I was gonna say as a Mammy, and Gone with the Wind, and Scarlett O'Hara's
1969.
sassy Mammy that's always telling her something because Vivian Lee, aka Scarlett O'Hara, was just a spitball fire. And anyway, Hattie McDaniel won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for the movie Gone with the Wind and for her role in the film Gone with the Wind. And she also was on Sugar Hill, and she owned a home, and you could see that to this day. It's still there.
Yes. It's interesting with her though. She broke into Hollywood, even though she was her typecasted as of a maid, kind of the roles of that is that a lot of there's controversy, right, with her
Of,
roles. And if you look at her history, you know more about that. But she felt like I rather, and there's a quote that says, I rather be get paid $700 a week to play a maid than $7 to really be a maid,
yeah,
during that time. So she became very wealthy because she, broke into Hollywood and whatnot. But it was interesting because her wishes were to be buried at Hollywood Cemetery. It's now called Hollywood Forever, but it was called Hollywood Cemetery. And Hollywood Cemetery has a ugly history of segregation, and they only allowed white people at the cemetery. So they said that she could not be buried there. So that's very, very sad that she was not able to be buried where she wished. She actually said she would wanted to be at.
yeah. It just goes to show you how racism has not changed too much to even this day. And it's unfortunate, but I'm very glad she's at Rosedale, because if you ask me, Hollywood Forever, it has a couple of people in there that I like to see, but I like Rosedale's aesthetic and the vibe of Rosedale much more than Hollywood Forever. Hollywood Forever is kind of burnt out. I mean, I like to go for other reasons, but Rosedale is definitely the place to go.
Yeah. So the
They're
new
lost.
owner of Hollywood Forever did want to extend to the family, like, we will, she could definitely come back here. We want her. But the family's like, no, we're not gonna disturb her resting place. So they added let me see the name of it here. At Hollywood Forever, they did like a cenotaph. And what that is, it's a monument to someone buried elsewhere, especially one commemorating people who had died in war. So it's usually used for war, but it's also, in this case, she was buried at Rosedale. The cenotaph was at Hollywood Forever because she originally wanted to be buried there.
Yeah, or let's say your cousin is out skiing in the French Alps, right? And you never hear from them, and months go by, and then a year or two go by, and there's no body found. You don't know where they're at, but after 10 years, you're just like, dude's dead, my cousin's dead. We go to the cemetery and we put a cenotaph there, like a memorial for someone who's not buried there.
Yeah. But yeah, it is better in a sense that she is at Angeles because it was a place that accepted everybody. So I do like that. And
Not to mention, she has a good spot, a good location. It's a nice location.
yeah, she doesn't have like a huge obelisk or mausoleum. We're gonna talk about all that in a little bit, but she has a flat, burial, ground burial, but it's in the front, and it's easy to find, and we were able to give her some nice flowers, so it was good to find her and see her. So the next person, next couple people, I guess you had a connection to because you were studying these women in your history class, right?
Yes, it's so funny how life imitates art, imitates life in the sense that I'm going to school and presently taking women's studies in American history. So I have a bunch of American women, and where I'm at right now in the book is we're talking about post-revolution, antebellum America. And so there's some women that are buried inside Rosedale, Angeles Rosedale Cemetery, that were appropriate in the period. For instance, there's Caroline Seymour Severance. She was born 1820, died 1914. She's known because she was an abolitionist and a suffragist, and she eventually moved with her husband and family to California. She's called the mother of clubs because she started so many clubs, and not just in California, but in the States, in New York, and where she's lived. She was one of the first suffragists and abolitionists, even before like Katie Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. So she's very important. Because of her and other people's efforts, women have a right to vote. And we also want to always remember that. She established the first women's club. It was called New England Women's Club in 1867. She did major development in California. She founded the first Unitarian Church in Los Angeles in 1877. And her clubs go on and on and on and on. And she's just, because of who she is and her efforts, we have rights now that we as women wouldn't have had during that time.
Yeah. And her obelisk, I guess it's small, but there's like stickers that say I voted on
Yeah,
it.
it looks like a lot of people go over there and place stickers all over it, which is really wonderful to see.
Okay, I'd also like
Because
to
it's like
mention,
they're
just really
thanking her
quickly,
in a sense
Jesse
for her
Benson
hard work.
Fremont. And it paid off. And
She died in
I'm
1902.
grateful.
She was a major writer and political activist. Her husband ran for presidency. I don't have the year, you guys. I apologize. But he did not win, and Buchanan won instead. She was anti-slavery, and her husband was one of the first senators, and he was called the Pathfinder of the West. And her husband was John C. Fremont. Now, he kind of has a history here in California of pushing out Californios up in like San Francisco area. So while she may seem wonderful for the American aesthetic of coming west and developing, what he helped do was to overthrow Mexican and Spanish people that were people of Mexican and Spanish descent that lived over here. He basically took their land from them. So it's important to remember while we celebrate her, her husband did that as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So just a couple other people that you'll see there, and we're not going to get into every single one, but you'll see the Glassell family. There's the Chateau family, which Chateau was originally bought Catalina Island, which later was bought by the Wrigley and Banning families. So, and he's right across from Phineas Banning, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool. In the best mausoleum pyramid tomb you'll see.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And then somebody interesting I thought was she was, I guess, a murderess. We didn't get to see her grave because it was supposedly in, her name is Louise P, and she was the first woman to be executed in San Quentin, or the second woman, I believe, to be executed in San Quentin in the gas chamber at the time. And she wasn't called like a, she just had different husbands. They unfortunately all, most of them committed suicide, and she had killed a few people in between that time. So she has a very dark history.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. It's like she telepathically said, "Kill yourself," and they just killed themselves.
Yes. And she was born in 1880 and she died in 1947. So she did a long time in prison too, but she ended up going back, and that's when she got executed. But they do state that she is in like a very dark part of the cemetery where it's kind of very, the grass is not growing. It's, I mean, the grass is not growing elsewhere right now because of drought, but it usually would be green. But in her part, it's very like not as nice, I guess. There's not many monuments and whatnot, and she's in an unmarked grave, which I still trip out when I hear unmarked graves. Like, how does that happen? But maybe it was for a reason they did an unmarked grave for her.
Who knows? Maybe the people of that time would have gone and defaced the area over and over and over again, or maybe just not to highlight, a psychopath.
Yeah. So I definitely want to read more about her. There's a lot of books about her. I want to kind of see more insight because you could, it was a different time, and the stuff she was doing is a trip.
Yes, and for women.
Yes, definitely. And then we have another interesting person. You're going to talk about Allensworth.
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Allen Allensworth. He was born 1842, died 1914. Now I have a personal, I'd say we both have a personal connection with him.
Yes.
We visited Colonel Allensworth was born a slave. He was born a slave in Kentucky. He escaped being a slave during the Civil War and then fought in the Union for the Union side, and then eventually made his way out. Of course, he became like a minister and did other things. Eventually, he came to California, and he helped to settle the first. He founded the town Allensworth, and it was the first Black community, and that was pretty amazing. And we've been to that community, or that what's left of that community, which is a couple hours north, past the Grapevine, and between two little cities called Delano and Corcoran. It sits just lonely on the road. Some old Victorian buildings and some other buildings that have been rebuilt over the years because they did not stand too well. But there's the little community that, and the vision that Colonel Allensworth saw is there, and we've been there, touched it, explored it. I personally paranormally investigated it. Me? Who's me? Can you repeat that, please? I just did a TikTok to it like earlier in the year and drove all around it really quick and made that into a video because it's a cool little place. And the one really nice thing about Allensworth, the town, is that it's considered a historical park. I think at this, well, it's considered a historical site, but you can go and park your RV and like stay overnight, and they take donations of like $6, which is like nothing, and you could just stay over there in your camper or your truck and stay overnight. So I highly suggest anyone who's listening go check out Allensworth. Right now, because of the pandemic, I don't think there's any kind of touring. At some point, they used to have tours where they could take you in, tell you about the schoolhouse and about the city. I don't know if it's going on right now, or not the city, but the town. I don't know when that's going to start up or if it has, but definitely look into it. What county is that?
Kern
That's like
County.
Kern County.
Yeah.
Kern County. Definitely check it out.
Yeah.
He's buried there.
We found all of them pretty easily just from online people that have also done their research online. We got to give credit to everybody that had posted before for that been to all these cemetery grave sites, because we're able to find everybody that we went to go put flowers on pretty easily. Um, the woman Fremont, I did read that she's actually cremated, but her urn is in ground. So her burial was in that sense. It wasn't the body. She was cremated.
Unfortunately, her headstone's kind of coming apart. There's some parts on the corner that are breaking off. You can imagine that happens over time, as it's been over 100 years since she's died. But she's in a nice little spot, and we spotted some cemetery cats not far from her.
Yes. So next we're going to talk about kind of the architecture, the artwork, the aesthetics of the cemetery. So one of the things that they have, there's a very small columbarium. So this columbarium, again, like I was saying earlier, it used to be a vault, a receiving vault for the bodies and whatnot, because for the crematory. But this columbarium was, established later. And I'll read the definition: a structure similar to a mausoleum meant to house cremated remains in an organized space, safe from weather conditions. So let's talk about our experience going into this columbarium.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you want to talk about yours first, or mine?
Well,
first?
Originally we weren't even planning to go in there. I was like, let's just go in. It was very random. Yeah. It has a cute, aesthetic. It's very kind of small, I guess. So we go in, and it's completely different from the outside. Obviously, it holds ashes. We go in. There's probably like a middle hallway, middle corridor, and then there's two other corridors on the right and the left, and some kind of like bathroom type of thing, or not bathroom. It's
like a sink.
Washroom.
Yeah, like a washroom.
Yeah, and then there's like a small lobby that connects everything, and to the left was like very beautiful space where they had urns and ashes, like in a library type of setting. There's very beautiful lighting from the.
It almost looked like a Victorian like office with the bookshelves. It was really nice how they had it set up.
I mean, I didn't really think anything of it, except that of course it's not as grandiose as a Calvary. Very different, but you kind of got a different vibe from it, right?
Yeah, so we had been outside for hours at this point. Mm-hmm. But we started our day early at an event and made our way to Rosedale. And by the time we got to Rosedale, it was near 2:00. And so we had been at the cemetery for quite a while at this point in the heat. It was pretty hot yesterday. We opened the door, and immediately cool air hit us, because obviously it's got some sort of air conditioner or something going on in there because the doors are closed. So of course it's going to be cooler. But I got kind of taken aback by a smell of like the ground, like a damping ground or dirty kind of smell, or like not dirty, but dirt. Like if you picked up dirt from the ground, you smelled it. It's like the smell of like dirt or earth.
Like very earthy or something?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And which is odd, because we were out in the dirt and the earth, and I wasn't smelling that at all. Mm-hmm. And just a vibe of kind of like a sad stuck, unwanted kind of, not maybe not unwanted, just an off vibe, just a really off vibe. And I try not to think, I was like, whoa, there's something here. I think there's something here. And then we went directly to the left and we went all the way down and we hung out for a couple minutes and just kind of taking the whole like atmosphere. That one, the first on the left, that first corridor was pretty cool. I like how they set up the urns and whatnot. Look nice. They have little windows and you can see the outside of the cemetery. Kind of cool. The flowers had been there. You could smell like the decay of flowers. But I mean, it wasn't bothersome. It was just whatever. So then we eventually walked back out and I got to that middle corridor. And sure enough, I felt that same feeling again, but it was much stronger. So I walked to the end of the corridor and kind of just stand there for a minute. And it seems like the middle corridor is probably the most new, meaning like the people in there are probably more modern as opposed to the sides. And there's just not a very off and odd feeling. Like not a bad, like a mean, like a mad feeling, but not a good feeling either.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a sorrowful feeling or a left feeling, a lone feeling. And it was pretty thick. And it kind of followed us to the next corridor for a couple of minutes. And we
It
just
was
at
like the weird faucet dripping. I don't know. It just was like kind of. I was getting a little scared after.
And then we looked all the way down the third corridor and saw some beautiful dead decaying flowers. And I think that's gorgeous the way they looked. And then we left. But yeah, definitely something paranormal going on in that spot specifically. As we were talking about this not too long ago, we talk about this sometimes. I've always gotten feelings, and sometimes now, because I'm so busy with life, I don't always feel them. Like I have to sit down and concentrate and just be quiet. And it's really hard for me to just quiet my mind. And other times, even though my life is so busy, there's an entity, a spirit, or something that just kind of pokes out and says, like, I'm here. And not literally, figuratively. There's something that happens where they make their presence known. And that's what happened, is there was something there that definitely wanted us to see or feel it or recognize it.
Right. So that was a really interesting. And we didn't even get to go to the chapel, which is down the way. So next time we have to go to the chapel.
Yes, next time.
There's more architecture over there, but there's still more to explore. I mean, there's different parts of it we didn't really get to. I mean, you can't just really go on one visit.
No, and it's a large, and I really enjoyed where Severance was buried because it's like she's on top of a hill and you can kind of see the whole like cemetery from where she's at. I really enjoyed that. And Allensworth too, where he's buried. It's
Yeah.
lovely. And that's like kind of like the veteran area, the soldier, the
That felt
GAR.
really, like I was saying, really sad to me because if you guys know, most of the veteran plots are specific. They're like very small and rounded. They kind of do like very similar plots. Some were a little bit different, but it kind of just signifies those were all soldiers. It just
Yeah.
felt more sad, I think, because of the reason they died, in like wars and stuff like that, which is not very nice. And it felt more like just right there was more rather than where we were at in the other sections with people that were more notable and probably died at an older age.
Yeah.
I think there's so yeah, there's different sections we haven't explored, so we definitely gonna go back. So, but there's a lot of cemetery lingo and a lot of different architecture that is at these cemeteries. What did you kind of find out so we could share?
Well, what I found out, some of the stuff, but remember this is a Victorian cemetery, and a lot of people in the Victorian era, while there's many that could read, there was a lot more that could not read. So even if you were to put down somebody's name and date of birth or who they were, you would, if you couldn't read, you would not know who was in there or what person was in there, what type of person. So a lot of the symbolism, I think, stems from that. When I was doing my research, and it said that people in that time needed symbols to help them know who was in these tombs or had in the grave in the dirt. with their headstones. So we've got things from anchors to angels to pillars. They all have different meanings, and I can keep going, and I can name them all for you guys through research in the different places different websites we've looked them up, and different websites we've looked them up. So anchors that you see on a headstone usually means that it has something to do with like the Navy, and that person may have been in the Navy or a seaman. So that's good to remember if you see an anchor on someone's headstone. If you see angels, it's usually meaning heavenly presence or heavenly messages. If you see a broken pillar, it usually means the life has gone too soon.
Mm.
If you see Celtic crosses, so the cross with like the circle in the middle, that usually means eternity. And cherubs are often for children. A book can mean education or scholarly, excuse me. Egyptian symbolism, like sphinxes or obelisks, often mean an afterlife or an eternity. Inverted torches means death. If they're still burning, means life after death. Lions often mean strength, stability, or endurance. Oak leaves also mean strength and endurance. The obelisks, which are also Egyptian, it usually means eternal life, heaven. Um, I'm trying to read my own writing here. This is horrible. Upon the deceased from the heavens. Oh, rays of sun for like the obelisk. So like the rays of sun touch the tip, the tip of the pyramid from the heavens. And then the shrouded, if you see something with like a shroud that kind of looks like a blanket or a sheet or something, a shroud. If it's shrouded, it means that it's like mourning, deep mourning. If you see a sword, it usually means military. That person was probably in the military. If you see a flower and there's an open bud, it usually means a life and able to bloom. So somebody who's gone too soon, that died too soon. If you see urns, it usually means mourning as well. A weeping figure means like deep grief or mourning. Laurels or wreaths.
My favorite.
Your favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Usually mean an eternity or everlasting life or victory or distinction. Again, it's kind of a loose interpretation. Although they have these meanings, they also can have multiple meanings, but these are the ones that are the most prominent. A rose can mean heavenly perfection, or it could be a woman. Lambs often refer to innocence or children. A dove usually means purity or peace, or can mean a woman as well. And ivy, ivy on the headstone would be like friendship, fidelity, immortality. And it goes on. There's so many in the Victorian era. Their flowers meant something. So like there was a whole lingo with flowers. If you sent someone flowers, it meant something specifically. So it's a lot to go into since there's so many different species of flowers.
Yeah.
But flowers were very important to the Victorian era. So you can imagine if they had that specific flower on the headstone, it would also translate into the headstone, the meaning of that person.
Yeah, definitely. And I was reading too that it said monuments of those who died in the late 1800s were more elaborate compared to now. So it makes sense how they used all of that artwork in their landing of death, which we don't really do at all for some of us.
It's a much different thing than it was back then.
Yes.
We have so many other vices and things that they never could have dreamed of, like television and internet and so forth and so on. We're much more preoccupied. Whereas I think back then they were, preoccupied with their loved one who's gone. So they want to make sure it's a beautiful place for them to rest.
Yes. And I did look up other terms because they kept coming up. The interment means the burial of human remains within a grave. I mean, it's a common term, but we might not know it, right?
No. May not.
And then there's inurnment, the process of placing an urn inside a niche. There's entombment. So in entombment, the process of placing a casket in a mausoleum. So like if you go to Calvary Mausoleum, those are entombed because they don't do cremation, so it's the whole casket in there.
Exactly.
And then there's epitaph, a praise or a form of words written in memory of a person who has died, especially as an inscription on a tombstone. And then as far as mausoleums, I mean, I love mausoleums and I wish I could have one when I die, but they're just kind of out of reach. Maybe I could manifest it, I don't know. But just to give you an idea, like now the cost of them, like the one that you sat in yesterday for that one was back then almost in today's dollars $1 million.
Yeah.
But
Obnoxious.
they could go for 25,000 to 60,000 for a simple one, or a one with 2 crypts above ground. 300 to 600,000 for an average walk-in mausoleum for 8 people, and up to 1 million or more for a larger, more elaborate structure and embellishments. So imagine that. It's very expensive.
Very.
But usually people that have obviously wealth, or they have, they want their family all together, and maybe they're significant, they're known families, or maybe they're not, they just have money. I did look up the actual word crypt. It's a subterranean chamber within a cemetery that protects the remains of the deceased from inclement weather. And like you were saying earlier, the obelisk came from ancient Egypt. And it says it would be for those who pass in a striking and spectacular way. Which it does, because when we see Bannings's obelisk, we're like, oh, or like, all Bixby's or all of those, it does, like, all these people were of importance or spectacular, right?
Exactly.
So
those crazy Victorians and those symbolism.
Yeah, so there's a lot of words that's used in that, and then also like the Victorian era. So yeah, I mean, you could learn a lot from just going to visit, and it's here in LA. So,
and why not? I mean, why not have that knowledge, and then you go visit somewhere else and you're like, oh, that right there, that headstone is definitely for a child.
yeah,
because it's got like a cherub or it's got a little lamb. Or you see like an obelisk and you're like, man, that person right there must have been someone important to his family or his community. So it's always never a bad time to learn some more knowledge.
Yeah.
And be competent in cemetery lingo, Victorian cemetery lingo.
Yeah, so we're thinking of gonna feature different cemeteries along the way, and they might not always be in LA. We're thinking of other places we could talk about historically in future episodes. So you can learn more about some of these places, and maybe not. It won't be as weird or odd, because I think I was reading back then, people, how you said, hung out there, and it was a place to go. And I mean, now in some ways it is. I mean, I see people at the cemetery in San Pete, Rancho Palos Verdes all the time. Green Hills, like there's always tons of people there. I guess it just doesn't seem the same because it's just a flat type of cemetery. It's very modern. It doesn't have what you see in these older cemeteries. So maybe it doesn't seem like they do, but people do. It's just a different type of ambiance you're getting with some of these older cemeteries.
Both Evergreen and Rosedale are both wonderful because I prefer going to cemeteries with the headstones that are out of the ground as opposed to the more modern flat ones. But out of the two, if I had to choose which one was my favorite, and this is not by their employees or their security guards, this is solely based on the aesthetic and the way they look, I'm gonna pick Rosedale. Angelus Rosedale is gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's definitely looked like it's kind of been forgotten, like it's been stopped in time. It hasn't been watered in like 100 years. It looks like, at least. It's got a big old dead tree in the middle of these beautiful palms. We can see the mountains, and all you see is just rows and rows and rows and rows of headstones.
Yeah. Speaking of the dead tree, there was a story where there was a person fixing or he was trimming the palms, unfortunately, and he ended up getting crushed by palms, like these leaves, like I don't know what, but back in the 60s, I was like, oh, that's sad. Like,
That is sad.
but yeah, those palms and trees kind of fell on him. So I don't know. I seen that. I was like, oh wow. But yeah, so we'll have more stuff. If you want to, when we on our Instagrams or YouTube, share what your favorite thing about these cemeteries. If you've gone there, I'm sure many of you guys have gone there. Share your stories or what you love about them, and then we'll be sharing more different places as we go along.
Yeah, more cemeteries. Cemeteries is going to be something coming up all the time. But right now, I'd love to hear any experience that you guys might have had in Rosedale or Evergreen, of course. Any paranormal experience? Did you guys catch any evidence? Let's hear of any stories. Please let us know.
Yes. And again, don't forget follow me on Swami Chronicles and follow our page on Beyond the Facade podcast on Instagram and the YouTube. We're still putting everything out there on YouTube.
And I'm at Observing Spooks in Other Places or Sabrina the Grown Up Witch.
Yes. All right. You have a good night, everybody.
Bye.